All right. Hey, good evening, folks. Once again, we are back taking a look at the tropics. Today is Thursday, July 17th, 2025. This is your evening update on 93L and the rest of the tropics. We're going to take just a minute or two to talk about the remnants of 93L. It's moved inland. It's no longer a threat to develop, but we're going to cover a little bit of what's going on with that, what could come of it next week if it decides it wants to try again. We'll explain, and then we will wrap up with talking about the rest of the tropics and kind of a 2 to 3 week outlook of what is coming around the bend between now, end of July, and maybe the beginning of August as we begin to peek that door open into the next month. So Atlantic Basin tonight, pretty quiet. There's a little bit of tropical wave activity off Africa, but the MDR is pretty quiet, and we really only have Invest 93L's kind of remnant ghosts with really quiet conditions elsewhere this evening. Satellite presentation and radar down here in the central Gulf Coast region. We have, we'll take your pick of where the low would be here. We've got a little remnant low moving up into southwest Mississippi. We've got some little vortexes moving around the part of the northern Gulf Coast here. We have a remnant MCV dumping heavy rain across central Louisiana. This was responsible for 11.5 inches of rain in Morgan City today. That was a big flash flooding event there. No doubt more flash flooding occurring in some of these bands into central Louisiana and heavy thunderstorms as well. And a flash flood warning is in effect for western metro New Orleans as this heavy rain band is hanging out. Looks like it's starting to weaken, but no doubt flash flooding is ongoing. Parts of Pontchartrain and Maurepas and other parts of the New Orleans area. National Hurricane Center down to 10%. They are no longer interested in this. This is not going to develop. There's no chance at this point. They've canceled the Hurricane Hunter missions, and 93L will be old news in a couple of days, hopefully. Weather Prediction Center's rainfall still to come. Another pocket, of rain still to come here and there. I mean, some of these pockets here of 2 to 3 plus inches of rain, along with the heavy rainfall here on the western coastline. A lot of that rain is going to kind of sit down here, and then it's going to kind of loop around tomorrow, and you're going to see the flow kick back out of the southwest. So there's still going to be another round of rain and thunderstorms all through this region tomorrow. So don't fully discount that threat. That flooding threat is going to continue through Friday and into early on Saturday before a lot of this tropical moisture clears up out of here. So if you're in this region, just know that tonight is not the only night you're going to have to deal with this and the remnant circulation of 93L. Speaking of that circulation, so we have the circulation here today with heavy precipitable water. This model here from Tropical Tidbits, the GFS, and it forecasts total precipitable water. This is basically if you took a column of air and you wrung all the moisture out of it, how much rainfall would you get? So these PWatts are like 2.2, 2.5. They're like super, super duper tropical, wet, nasty, sloppy, whatever. Pretty common for what you'd see this time of year in the tropics. Okay, 93L's ghost goes up into the Tennessee Valley, and I'll follow it along my cursor here. So it goes up like this, and it winds up finding itself in the Carolinas and the Mid-Atlantic and Appalachians here on Sunday morning. Now, as this happens, a pretty strong cold front is looking to clip down out of Canada. This is like a pretty solid cold front for this time of year. Right. And this is kind of like the second of these two fronts that were coming out. The one that's coming through today where all the cool airs across Wisconsin and Minnesota and the Great Lakes, Well, then a reinforcing front is going to kick out on Sunday, the last of these for a little while for sure. And this is going to kind of shove all the moisture with 93L back down to the south. This is kind of the orientation of this front is very fast and very progressive. So it cuts down, and you can see all the browns indicating cool, dry air and a very, very clear frontal boundary coming down. So all that moisture gets shoved southward. So instead of exiting out into the Atlantic Basin, it kind of gets cut off and it gets forced around and back towards Florida because, well, it doesn't really have anywhere else to go. We can see this continue into the weekend and into early next week. As this is Tuesday, Wednesday, we kind of have this little backdoor cold front starting to work into parts of Georgia and the South Carolina area. And with that, on the tail end of that little backwards front is the remnant of 93L. Now, models are showing this moving back into the Gulf region. And, I'm not going to say it's going to redevelop or anything, but this is pretty much what 93L looked like this past week. A broad wave axis with tons of moisture and a high to the north. The orientation is going to be different. There's going to be some things different, but if this holds together, there is not a 0% chance it could try again to do what we just saw this week. Slowly grind east to west through the Gulf, bring people heavy rain, enhance daytime thunderstorms. We may very well have the same pattern on our hands going into Friday. So I'm just going to let that out there. It's not social media bullcrap. It's real. It's really going to do something like this, at least in some capacity or another. But just don't let it get out of hand. We're not looking at another hurricane. It's not going to be anything crazy. it's way too early to speculate what this might turn into besides a bunch more rain. So that is something to keep an eye on. And if you see it, it's not like wrong, but also if the person's trying to tell you that another major hurricane is going to spin up or whatever, just kind of take it with a grain of salt, right? So that's all I got for 93L today. So I want to take a couple minutes and just talk about what we're moving towards, right? So we're in the middle of July. We actually a little bit past the middle of July at this point, which means we are coming up on the roller coaster beginning to ascend through hurricane season. A lot of you that follow pages like this have seen this graphic. This is from the National Weather Service and the National Hurricane Center and shows the storms per day over the last 100 years, showing that basically about mid-August to mid-October is the heart of your hurricane season, and very little activity falls outside of that. However, you are right here today, and we are about to see the roller coaster begin to ascend up the hills. So we are going into a period that is more active. When we turn the corner to August, we see more activity. If you start looking at the 2 to 3 week outlooks, what could we look at to see what the pattern is going to be? Because up until this point, the pattern has generally not been favorable across the Atlantic basin, okay? We have had below average temperatures in the Atlantic overall. This is some ocean temperature analysis, some tropical tidbits showing the departure from normal. And yes, as a whole, the Atlantic basin is warmer than normal if you average all this out because of the subtropics, and the eastern Atlantic is very warm. But where we typically see hurricanes develop is down in the MDR, the main development region, and this has been running cool. There's been very strong trade winds here and in the Caribbean where we don't see a lot of anomalous warmth. I mean, last year, this is where Beryl formed over here by Dominican Republic, Haiti, and Jamaica, and we had, a monster Cat 4 or 5, hurricane going through here this time last year. It just went through. This year, we've seen nothing but wind shear and cooler temperatures. So wind patterns broadly govern how these things respond, and the wind patterns are going to be changing slowly. So this is in the last 7 days. We have seen some anomalous warming here in the central Atlantic, not quite the MDR itself, but what basically happens is as we go later into the season, tropical waves that leave Africa will start like way down here early in the season, and they'll ride really low, like basically like scraping South America. But then as we work into like the middle of August, waves will start coming up here as all the air continues to rise up from the equator and from the tropics. We see the waves move northward, and you can see here that they'll be a little more positioned to be in that more warm water. So we see that the water temperatures are trying to warm, and we know that the wind patterns are going to let them continue to warm. So by the time we get to the beginning of August, we could have a little bit above average normal temperatures in the MDR, and you could have water temperatures a little bit more primed to be ready to support some tropical waves that are trying to develop. For what it's worth, the European model ensembles longer term outlook. This is going out 180 hours. So I don't know exactly what day this is, but it's the 25th of July is what this is valid for, shows that 1 or 2 tropical waves may have a small chance to develop. Now, we wouldn't look at this far out and go, oh yeah, get ready, Windward Islands. It's not like that, but it is like it's like a canary in the coal mine type signal. It's a little hint like, hey, you want to take a look at some stuff. This is what the models are seeing. So we think that would probably be our first window for some genuine tropical waves to try to develop, not just the slop and junk we've seen floating around the coastline here. This is basically what we've had named so far in the season with the 3 named storms we've had in 93L's futile effort to develop. Another reason for this is the MJO. So I'm not going to really go super in the weeds here, but one of the things forecasters look at when we look at like multiple weeks down the road is the propagation of broad scale wind patterns, which is basically what you could call the MJO. It is a thing. It's basically an upper air propagation of wind patterns that govern where air generally wants to rise and generally wants to sink. And typically when one side of the hemisphere is rising, another side is trying to sink. So this is in some respects something that governs, why we see the hurricane season often go in bursts of 2 or 3 weeks where we'll get a bunch of activity and then it'll kind of go dark for like a week or two. Like you ever notice that like in August and September, it's not usually an endless onslaught. It's just like, oh, there's like 4 hurricanes and then now there's none, And what we generally see here is that when we move out of phases 2 and 3, which is what we've been stuck in for a while, not only is the MJO moving into phases 5 and 6, which are more transitionary phases, and going into 7, and 8 and 1, which is basically this side of the graphic is where we see the rising air of the Atlantic and a lot more opportunity for storms to develop. But we also see that it's getting a little bit stronger. When the lines here are very close to the center, it means it's not very strong. The signal is weak and it's interrupted. But we see that a lot of models are actually predicting this to get stronger. So we move away from the center. So we know we're moving towards a stronger MJO, and it's moving into the side of the graphic that we would typically see a little bit more activity on the Atlantic side. So those things are something we look at. And then we can also look a little more small scale and look at Kelvin waves and zonal anomalies. And I'm not going to bore y'all with all the details. Just know that we are typically at our side of the basin is somewhere right about here, and we can see multiple Kelvin wave signals going into the third and fourth weeks of July, maybe the start of August, showing that we might have some early Kelvin waves try to run across the basin. And while these don't always kick off a tropical storm or hurricane, they can sometimes be like the primer. They can kind of like help juice it up, like fertilize the Atlantic, if you will, for the seeds to come off of Africa and grow, if that's a terrible analogy, but just whatever. You know what I mean? Same thing with the upper anomalies. We've had a lot of shear over the basin, but there are some signals that the shear should relax a little bit, not completely, but we kind of have these pockets of blues and more neutrals starting to develop around our area. And again, also indicating that the upper level winds, which we can kind of back this up with like longer term Euro data, which shows all this red, all this wind shear across the basin. This has been the hostile look at the Atlantic all summer so far. But as we go into the end of July, the start of August, look what begins to happen. All that shear begins to relax, and we start seeing a little more rising motion, a little more friendly trade winds for storms. All this kind of adds up. And this is also going to affect, by the way, really quick, the pattern over the central and eastern U.S. This has been the look that we've had for much of July, which is a trough over the central U.S. and then ridges on either side. And this has been one of the reasons we've had so many repeated rounds of moisture, because we've had moisture just funneling in around the Bermuda Azores High, coming in under this trough, and then producing a lot of flash flooding across the southeast and like south central U.S. This has been a pattern that really hasn't broke that much this summer, and that's why we haven't had a lot of heat waves. Like, it's been hot because it's summer, but it hasn't been like crippling heat really, besides like spots here and there for like 3-4 days, and it kind of breaks. Well, all this cold Canadian air is going to begin to retreat, and as we look into the end of the month, we get a very different look. We start seeing high pressure build over the Four Corners and over the plains, and a large ridge is looking to set up by the end of the month over a lot of the eastern and central U.S., with the trough more displaced over here. And this is not a great look if you're talking about tropical storms and hurricanes moving towards the U.S. This is a look that would generally coax them our way, or at least make them more of a threat to us, because you would have a weakness here. So instead of being deflected out to sea, they would move towards that weakness in the trough. Now, I'm not going to be like, oh yeah, get ready, Texas or Florida or North Carolina. Like, it's not like that. It's just, we look at all these things, you start stacking them up together, and you go, yeah, well, okay, so yeah, beginning of August, we could start having issues. So the first 2 weeks of August got a little busy. Would not be surprised. And I always say this for storm seasons that start quiet. You know, people fall asleep. They go, it's another dud season, whatever. And then all of a sudden, the tropics roar to life in August or September. And everyone's like, oh my God, I couldn't have seen this coming. Well, yeah, if you watch people like me, you probably could have. So that's what I got for you guys today. It's going to be hot. I mean, this is the CPC outlooks going into next week, and this continues to the end of the month, just really above average temperatures. Not so much in the terms of rainfall outside of like the Great Lakes and then some of the Gulf Coast, if that tropical moisture works back up under the ridge. But even in the weeks 3 and 4, going into the first beginning week of August, it is going to be very hot across the southeast U.S., and it's going to be probably not like a crazy intense heat wave at any one day, but it's going to be probably a few weeks of sustained heat, well into the 90s, hundreds, where it's drier, that kind of thing. It's going to suck. So that's what I got for you guys today on your tropical update and your extended outlook. We will be back on YouTube next time there is a threat. If this 93L stuff redevelops, we'll be back for that. If not, you'll probably hear from me in August. So until then, guys, thanks for watching. Facebook page got everything you need if in between now and then. And again, appreciate your viewing, and have a good one.